Hi there. Welcome back to the Mindset Check podcast. I'm your coach, Misha McKittrick. This is a podcast where we believe that as you take time for a mindset check, you have more power than you think you do, and where we also believe that you have the capacity to break down and understand how you feel and believe about life after death, and that changes the way you go through grief. How are you? Oh, I'm so excited to be walking through this with you and sharing a piece of my heart that really has helped me move through life differently because of what I believe. I'm really grateful to be able to sit in this space with you. And like I've said before, thank you so much for the privilege of allowing me to hold your heart gently as we walk through this together and as we really break down and talk about grief and, kind of dive in pretty deep. This is the first season of the Mindset Check podcast. And if you haven't been listening with us, what we're doing is we're going through my journal from when I was 15 and pregnant. And I go through a lot of really tough years, including losing that little girl that I pushed pause on my life to just dedicate and reroute my life towards. And this little girl passes away, and that's where we're at in the story. You are more than welcome to go back and listen to the story as it is given chronologically, or to jump in with us today as we are taking apart grief and really walking through parts of it that helped me in hopes they help you. As far as this entry goes, the only person that isn't completely explained is Mary, and she is Jesse's mom. With that said, we can jump right in. February 15th, 1995. Yesterday was Valentine's. I woke up to roses in a balloon and a card or two. It's beautiful. I made Jesse a candlelight dinner, and I gave him the shoes I bought him. I love him so much. Except, I don't like it when he's ornery, of course. He asked me to drive him to Milford and back today, and I didn't. I feel really bad, but I would drive over there and sit there the whole day, which would be kind of hard, and after he got off work, I would drive back with him. My Aunt Noni sent roses and flowers yesterday to me that said, quote, "Take one day at a time. Love, Aunt Noni." I thought that was nice. The missionaries came on Monday. We tried to get them to come on Sunday, but they were busy, and Mary was going to make reservations to stay in St. George, but something told her not to. So they came to the discussion, which worked out perfect. I'm still in shock. I'm just in awe about Taylee. I feel like in a few days I'll see her again. Some days I get really shaky, kind of. Usually when I'm alone. Like when I went to the health department. She asked me if I was still nursing, and I started to cry. And then filling out forms, I couldn't even think, how old am I? I know that all of this is happening for the right reasons, because so many things has told me it did. She was too perfect and didn't deserve to go through this life. It comforts me to think about where she is and that she's not getting hurt or sick. I'm grateful for this knowledge. I took her a valentine that I made to her grave. She would have liked it. First, I just want to start out by applauding my Aunt Noni. Those flowers and just the most simple message, just to take note of anytime you know of someone who's going through something big in their life, just a small message and a gesture. And it meant so much to me. I wrote in my journal that I thought it was nice, but I can remember, like in my mind, in my memory, she actually sent them like 6 months later, but obviously it was like almost a month later. And, I think it was just at that point where when you experience something big like a death and, you have a funeral and there's a lot of things that pour in. There's a lot of people who think about you and send, like, it feels like you're in a flower shop, in your home, because there's so many arrangements and it's incredible. And there's a certain point when those things die off. And they, people have to go back to life, and that's okay. But for you, it feels strange. It feels strange. And so when my Aunt Noni sent me that arrangement, it really just meant so much because it came after. And so I would say, just remember that if you're ever on the outskirts of something that goes down and you think, oh, well, I'm not going to do it. I didn't get it to him in time. Still do it. Still do it, because especially the ones that seem to trickle in after, they mean a lot, and my Aunt Noni was completely, supportive, but it was just, I think she just knew that it was at that time that maybe I would need a lift or a reminder. So it was super precious. And that little theme of take one day at a time propelled me. Like, it meant that it was okay, that from day to day, no matter how I felt, that it was okay. That was okay. And my dad really taught me that also, that to just be authentic to my feelings, whatever I was feeling in the moment. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth in a couple of episodes, but permission to feel how you feel as you're going through grief is vital, and it's important to recognize that. You give that to yourself. You are the one who gives yourself that permission. I was talking with a really good friend this week. Her name's Jenna. And she was telling me that she felt like grief was the hardest emotion. Like, it was just so much for her. Like, grief was just overwhelming. And we had a really amazing conversation about that. Because I think that your response and your feelings toward grief says a lot about what you've allowed yourself to process and where you're at with all of it. And yes, it takes time. And yes, it is a process. So let's break this down and let's talk about it. I want to start, we're going to come back to Jenna, but I want to start with this story, a response that I found that was a woman. She was just saying, my friend just died and I don't know what to do. And she got a lot of different responses from people in her life. And one of them came from an old man that wrote an incredible comment to her. And this was the comment. All right, here goes. I'm old. What that means is that I've survived so far. And a lot of people I've known and loved did not. I've lost friends, best friends, acquaintances, coworkers, grandparents, mom, relatives, teachers, mentors, students, neighbors, and a host of other folks. I have no children. And I can't imagine the pain it must be to lose a child, but here is my 2 cents. I wish I could say that you get used to people dying. I never did. I don't want to. It tears a hole through me whenever someone I love dies, no matter the circumstances. But I don't want it to, quote, not matter. I don't want it to be something that just passes. My scars are a testament to the love and relationship that I had for and with that person. And if the scar is deep, so was the love, so be it. Scars are a testament to life. Scars are a testament that I can love deeply and live deeply and be cut or even be gouged, and that I can heal and continue to live and continue to love. And the scar tissue is stronger than the original flesh ever was. Scars are a testament to life. Scars are only ugly to people who can't see. As for grief, you'll find it comes in waves. When the ship is first wrecked, you're drowning, with wreckage all around you. Everything floating around you reminds you of the beauty and magnificence of the ship that was and is no more. All you can do is float. You may find some piece of wreckage and you hang on for a while. Maybe it's a physical thing, a happy memory, a photograph, etc. Maybe it's a person who is also floating. For a while, all you can do is float, staying alive. In the beginning, the waves are 100 feet tall and crash over you without mercy. They come 10 seconds apart and don't even give you time to catch your breath. All you can do is hang on and float. After a while, maybe weeks, maybe months, you'll find the waves are still 100 feet tall, but they come further apart. When they come, they still crash over you and wipe you out. But in between, you can breathe, you can function. You never know what's going to trigger the grief. It might be a song, a picture, a street intersection, the smell of a cup of coffee. It can be just about anything, and the wave comes crashing. But in between waves, there is life. Somewhere down the line, and it's different for everybody, you will find that the waves are only 80 feet tall or 50 feet tall, and while they still come, they come further apart. You can see them coming for the most part and prepare yourself. And when it washes over you, you know that somehow you will again come out on the other side, soaking wet, sputtering, still hanging on to some tiny piece of wreckage, but you'll come out. Take it from an old guy. The waves never stop coming, and somehow you don't really want them to. But you learn that you will survive them, and other waves will come and you will have to survive them too. If you're lucky, you'll have lots of scars from them, lots of loves, and lots of shipwrecks. Oh, so I loved what he wrote, and I think there's a few things that I want to kind of take apart and break apart with. You know, we always say on this podcast that what happens in life is not what matters. What matters is what you think about what happens in life, right? And so for me, it's more about what the waves are. Like, what is that wave when it comes crashing over you? Is it debilitating? What is that for you? So let's go back to Jenna for a second. Jenna and I were talking about how so many times life is going so fast. And so sometimes when grief happens, that doesn't pause all of life. And most of the time grief doesn't. But, you know, Jenna has experienced a lot of miscarriages. And that's something that typically can go very unseen to the outside world. So these personal griefs. And she talked about how she just puts her head to the plow and kind of ignores it because she has to keep going. She has to keep taking care of her family, keep taking care of her life and herself. And in a sense, avoiding it is not having to deal with the pain, right? And so we were talking about when we do that pee dance. You'll know what I'm talking about. I don't know. I think especially women do this. And I kind of use the example of sometimes I'll be in my kitchen, and I just did it this week where I had to pee so badly. But for whatever reason in my mind, I was like, okay, I just have to open this package and quickly, I'm making dinner and I'm like, okay, just, and then I stopped for a minute and I was like, what are you doing? it will take me like 5 seconds to go in the other room and use the restroom and come back to exactly what I'm doing. What am I doing? And I think sometimes that's how we move through, the not processing of emotions and things that are in our life. Right? And so then we build it up to be even bigger than it is. Or kind of like even like more of a monster than it is. Because if we can develop it into something else, then what we're doing is we're making it into something that we, okay, let me just say it like this. Those waves are something that I look forward to. And I know that I know that is hard to hear for some people. But the reason why is because those are the things that remind me of her. And if I never felt those waves, then in essence, I would not be feeling her. And to me, that's more sad than feeling sad that she's not here. And then another thing that we talked about, Jenna and I, we talked about how if something's sad, it's probably something that was good. Right? Like if you're missing a person in your life, you're missing that person because they were a good person. And typically we don't, we're not going to walk around and feel bad over something that wasn't good. And I think if we can shift our mind and understand, gosh, you've heard people say like, I know like that hurt so bad, but I also had the opportunity to love so hard and so good. And when I really break that apart and you think about how all of the people that we surround ourselves with in life, all of those people we become a piece of. So if we're surrounding ourselves with people who are, good for us or a good influence on us, like I think of my girlfriend, Megan, who is one of the most compassionate people around, and she inspires that in me. When I think about my girlfriend, Penny, she is extremely patient in so many aspects of life. And when I'm with her, she inspires that in me. And so if we think of these waves coming up as ways to remember our people in our life, and even sometimes, Jenna and I broke this down really hardcore about her miscarriages, because in a miscarriage, there's the grief of what could have been or what would have been. And then there's all of these different layers of what we believe about that miscarried child. And we revert to last week and asking why. Remember we talked about the difference between being a whyner, WHYNERS, and asking why. And when we can really dive in and ask why, we receive a bigger picture. We receive something that's better to replace the only negative that comes from these waves that crash on us. So if we open our eyes for just a little bit and try to look for the good thing that influenced us or that came into our life for whatever reason, then we can see that it's allowing us to build, right? So in the example of I'm missing a person, what's the best characteristic about that person that you're being reminded of? What is it that you love about them? And when you allow yourself to feel that, you become influenced by that characteristic. The good from the ones that we've lost can inspire the same thing in us if we let it. If we stop doing the pee dance long enough to take care of ourselves. And to remind ourselves that we're not just here to survive and to put our head down and to plow forward and to just make it. There's more. There's more. And what's more is what it is that we're thinking about what's happening. I love to think about how the different places where emotions happen in our body, right? Like suffering happens in our mind. Like if we break it apart, pain can happen inside of our body, but suffering only can happen in our mind. And we can suffer 1,000,000 times over. Or we can adjust our thinking. We can adjust that. And we can choose to see it differently. I love adjusting the idea of what a wave is when it comes crashing. Because I believe that we can learn to welcome the wave. That when it comes, emotion and all, that we get to think of those as privileged moments, incredible moments where we choose to keep our people alive, to feel them, to connect with them. Or if it's not a person, to actually process that pain, to allow it to move through your body. When we push it down and we choose not to feel it, we're teaching our body not to feel. We're teaching our body that it's okay to be numb and not to respond to life. So I had this happen, and you'll see in my journal there's lots of times where I cry after this, and then there's a period where I'm experiencing things years later, realizing that for some reason sad things will happen and I'm not crying. I'm not crying. Like I had become numb. Like I still could feel something, but it was distant. It was like it was muted. And I think sometimes we have a way of protecting ourselves so that we can move through, not get too attached because we maybe don't want to feel that pain again. And so there was a certain point where I made a pact with myself. And I said, all right, I'm going to choose to feel or to cry whenever it comes up, even if it's ugly, even if it's public, even if it's, I just made that pact with myself. And then there was this experience that I had as I was graduating college. And I was in a public place and completely flooded with tears. And my husband now was sitting next to me, and he just kept putting his hand on me and saying, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yes, trust me, it's good." But that's all I could get out because I was just allowing it to wash over me because I finally allowed it. And my mom did the same thing. After my dad passed away, she cried, but then some time went on and she stopped crying. She stopped crying and the tears came no more. And we talked about it. And I told her how I had to learn how to re-cry too. And then there was this moment. We had this conversation about, Mom, you just have to let it come when it comes. And then we were at my grandfather's funeral. And it was a beautiful service. And we came outside and I looked at my mom and she had tears, tear-stained face. And I literally jumped up and down and I was hugging her. I was like, "You cried, Mom. You cried." We're welcoming ourselves back into feeling. We're signing up to say, I'm here to process this life. I'm here to feel it. And I'm here to think it through too, so that I can really adjust what it is I'm thinking in those moments, so that it can become better. When we're flooded with it, we can go, gosh, thank you. I'm so glad I get to feel you today. I'm so glad. I'm so glad that I get to connect with you. I'm so glad I get the reminder of your goodness and what it can influence in me. I love this quote by Paul Richter that says, "Each departed friend is a magnet that attracts us to the next world." Isn't that beautiful? I want to take just a second and show you something. And this is going to actually take you physically participating with me just for like 1 minute. If you're not driving or if you're not in a place where you can't do this, I want you to try to just jump as high as you can and see how high that is. So just kind of like pause what you're doing and jump. Just see how high you can jump. And then pay attention to how high you got, okay? And now I want you just to stand with your legs straight, and I want you to try to jump without bending your knees. Don't even bend your knees a little bit. Just try to jump. Like you're pretty much just going on your tiptoes, right? You can't really propel yourself and get some air without bending your knees, right? So now I want you to bend your knees just a tiny bit. Just bend just a little bit and see how much you can jump. And finally, recognize that when you actually have the full measure of bending your knees however much you want, that's when you reach your highest jump, the jump that I asked you to jump in the very beginning. And I only brought you through that for just a minute to show you that when we're brought low with our trials or our difficulties, that is what propels us into being able to jump higher. That is what allows us the space to get air underneath our feet. That's what I think about when I picture myself at that health department, being asked if I was still nursing. That's an experience that I had completely forgotten about until reading about it. And the confusion that came when I couldn't even think how old I am, how old I was in the, and I forget now, but you don't forget that when you're that age. You don't forget your age. It's just a cloud. It's like you're living in a cloud when you're going through that. And so I want to continue to kind of dive into beliefs. I want to show you what I believe. And then it's so interesting that I sat down to do this episode and I felt one of those whispers. And, the whisper said, call Don. Call this friend of mine, his name's Don, and ask him to refresh your memory about that story of his. And so I'm going to share those things with you. My friend Dawn shared this story with me years ago, and I remember I had this image flash in my mind as I was starting to record this episode. Dawn, at the time, was a very educated person, and especially in the field of science. He had a wife and a family, multiple children, and one of his sons and his daughter was in a car accident with his wife. The car accident was terrible. His wife was seriously injured, spent 2 weeks in the hospital. His son had minor injuries, and his daughter, who was 11 years old at the time, passed away in this accident. And I remember when he shared this story with me, he was explaining how his beliefs were that he was an agnostic, right? He didn't know. He had declared, like, I'm not real sure that God exists. I'm not really sure. He had been raised to believe in God. He had been raised in a home that was religious, and after seeking education and kind of developing his own questions, he decided to that he didn't really know and that he didn't have evidence. And so he fell on the side of life of being agnostic. And I remember when he told this story, he stood at the side of his daughter's grave and started thinking, I know this can't be the end. I know this cannot be the end, and I will never see her again. Like, that doesn't feel right in my heart, in my soul. And I think that's a really big part of experiencing the death of a loved one. It brings up those questions for us. I love Marianne Williamson says, something very beautiful happens to people when their world is fallen apart. A humility, a nobility, a higher intelligence emerges at just the point when our knees hit the floor. And that is what was happening to Don. Right? His world had fallen apart, and he refused to believe that that was the last time he would see his daughter. These are his words, he said. My agnostic point of view of no God and no life after death tormented me. After some time, I reached the conclusion that I couldn't go on living with these feelings and needed to do something to end my emotional suffering. So I made a choice. The choice was not to end my life. The choice was to either believe in God and life after death, or to continue not believing. I chose to give up being a non-believer. I chose to believe in God and believe in life after death. After making this choice, I was somewhat comforted concerning the death of my daughter. Just choosing to believe that she was still spiritually alive helped me to feel a little bit better. Although I still grieved for her, however, I didn't know and wanted to know for certain that there was life after death and that God really did exist. Don, in his story, continues to go on about how he experienced that, how he came to believe. I love how after simply making the choice to believe that his daughter still spiritually existed, that something felt better for him. And that is what I feel like I want to share with you as well, are my beliefs about where I think she is, about where I think, what I think my daughter is up to, what's she doing, and will I see her again? Those are the things I want to share with you. I think it's interesting that all of us are asked, right, this deepness when we go through grief, when we experience extreme loss. And we're asked to navigate those things. So I'm going to share with you also what felt right for me. one of the things that I loved from Don's story is he talked about how science is based on what's called empirical evidence. And it's evidence that's obtained through the senses, evidence that you can see, hear, or touch. The evidence must also be objective, meaning it's evidence that you and others can see, hear, and or touch. And he talks about how, coming from a science background, it's really difficult to gain empirical evidence about spiritual things. And then he talks about this, he gives more details about his road, but he says that he has this realization that his own feelings really are sensory evidence. It's sensory evidence of what the person is feeling, even though they're the only one that's feeling it. And he started to think through how that if he burns his finger on a hot stove, he feels real pain, even though nobody else can feel it. But not dismissing that that is still sensory evidence that his finger was burned. And so he decided that he could accept that his own feelings, his own personal feelings of pain or joy, that they're real sensory feelings, even if nobody else experienced those feelings. And that he should accept those feelings as evidence. Sensory evidence. I love being inspired by Don's story. There are many things that I have felt about my daughter and experiences I've had after she has passed with her that have been life-altering for me. I believe that I will be with her again, and knowing that changes everything for me. There was a moment where my dad and my Uncle Keith, after Taylee's funeral, we had a powwow. It's really so loving for me to look back on. You know, I was raised as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I knew the baseline, and you know that I was kind of floating, right, at the time, just kind of going through life. And they sat down with me and made sure that I knew what our religion had been taught about children who pass away. Because this is what changes it for me. And so that's why I'm sharing with you. If it helps you come to any conclusions on your own about what you think and feel, that's incredible. If it helps you understand that it's really important to get into a mindset or a mind space where you can be okay with what you believe about where they are. Then you become more comfortable continuing through your life. And sometimes, depending on what you do believe, you can feel actually quite glorious about where they are and what is really happening. So my dad and Uncle Keith sat down with me and they shared with me a quote that I hung on so tightly too. And it says this, and this is given by a modern prophet, Joseph Smith. He says, "I have meditated upon this subject and asked the question, why is it that infants, innocent children, are taken away from us? The Lord takes many away, even in infancy, that they may escape the envy of man and the sorrows and evils of this present world. They were too pure, too lovely to live on earth. Therefore, instead of mourning, we have reason to rejoice as they are delivered from evil, and we shall soon have them again. Based on what I've learned, I do believe that I will be able to raise this little girl again. That I'll be able to have her on my hip. And that I get to do that. And it was really a cool conversation with my dad. My dad pointed out, hey, Mish, you know what's so neat? He said, talking about my Grandpa Cox, he said, have you ever seen Grandpa mad? And I said, yeah, I actually have seen him mad one time. And it was when one of my cousins was doing something that they shouldn't have done and they were actually in danger. And my grandfather was mad. But outside of that, I was like, yeah, no, I've never seen him mad. And he tried to describe to me how patience comes as we grow, and as we age, we become more refined. How Grandpa was more patient than my dad was. And he pointed that out to me, and he said, don't you think it would be really cool if Grandpa could raise a child being at that spot? And then he said that you get to do that. You get to do that. And so it shifts inside your mind and can become a privilege to understand that this little girl, she's only separated from her body for a short season. And that I get to be with her again. And I'll tell you that I have had really incredible experiences that are very full of sensory evidence. Where I've learned to not just believe that truth, but to know it. I also have a really incredible evidence, if you will, of her acting in my life. I believe that it's an advantage that she is on the other side, fighting for me. That she shows up in ways that are unexplained and unexpected. And I love my dad walking me through that too, because he said, there's been a lot of people who have experienced really sort of miraculous things. He talked to me about the difference between, it coming whenever it's supposed to be there, like an experience like that, versus expecting that. Because if I expect it, then I'll go through life feeling, sadness that it's not, that I haven't experienced anything with this angel, And I'm really glad that he did that, because there were people around me who experienced her, even my dad, when he had experienced extreme pain and when he was close to dying. And I wanted that too. But I really understood that it comes in times. And I've been able to have glimpses of her showing up. And I've been able to have a couple of completely undeniable experiences. And I've also had an experience that helped me to see that she's with me so much that it's difficult for me to tell when she's not with me. That's pretty cool. And so I share this with you because maybe you're in a spot where it feels confusing. Maybe, like Don said, that how he couldn't cope with the idea that that was the end of her existence. Maybe there's something more to your understanding that you can ask, that you can listen for the whisperings that we talk about so much, and that you can be directed. And maybe that belief will help you to think about those waves in a different way. Maybe they'll help inspire you to be the best part of what is being like a magnet and pulling you towards heaven. I do believe with my whole heart that you will be with them again. And in my opinion, knowing that changes everything about the way I think about losing her and about what's possible for the future. I truly am so grateful to carry that belief that they still participate in our lives, that she's on that side fighting for me on this side. I know it's difficult. I know it's difficult that you can't call them on a whim. I know the absence of affection and touch is really hard. But they really are still there. I love this quote that says, it's a tiny bit cheesy, but it says, I still love it. It says, those we love don't go away. They walk beside us every day, unseen, unheard, but always near, still loved, still missed, and very dear. Welcome the waves, my friends. They allow you to feel. They allow you to be in touch with your emotions and for the good that can be inspired in you from their incredible influence. I hope that taking a look at that helps you find that you have more power than you think you do. One of the things that I love that we're doing right now as a community is dropping into the Mindset Check Facebook group, which you can join for free. And we're having conversations in there. Last week I had a conversation with one of our listeners named Yolanda, and she had the idea to go back in her own journals. And it was such a cool conversation because as she pulled up her own journals, she started reading and she brought to the surface and shares with us in the Mindset Check Facebook group. Her and I just dive in right there and have a little conversation about some of the things that she realized from going back and reading in her journal. And it was a really therapeutic experience. So just an invitation to drop in there if you haven't, and also an invitation to reach out to me if you would like to share something in that group with our other listeners. It's such a fun form of community. And you can also use it as a space to work through something. So if you're up against a wall with something that is in your life and you are, just kind of need help walking through it, we can use it for that space, or to get clear on anything that we've talked about in the podcast. If you have questions that you want to ask or an experience you want to share, we can use it for that. So reach out. You can find me on Instagram. You can DM me. That's at my friend Misha, and Misha is Mesha. You can email me. The email address is hello@myfriendmisha.com. And you can also reach out to me on Facebook. I would love to hear from you. Also, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I received a lot of support and love and messages, especially from last week's episode, just with how hard that was for me to dive in and to start sharing this story. And just thank you so much. You truly are such a supportive and incredible audience. And it makes the story so fun to share. So thank you so much. Once again, just thank you so much for letting me walk on this journey with you. And I want you to remember at the close of this episode that you have every capacity to work it out inside of your own mind, to figure out, what your soul is resonating with and what you believe about death, about these heavy and life-changing experiences, so that your path, your road, becomes easier to navigate. Until next time, my friend.